My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm 28 years old, and after losing my baby at 16 weeks, I begged my parents to attend just one grief counseling session with me. They promised they would be there, swore they understood how much I needed them, and then chose to go to my brother's softball tournament instead. What happened next in that support group room changed everything. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, witnessed their absence during the most vulnerable moment of my life. And what she did about it sent shockwaves through my entire family that are still reverberating 8 months later. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been the type of person who believes in building solid foundations. In my work as a marketing coordinator at Mountain View Marketing Agency here in Denver, I spend my days creating campaigns that tell compelling stories that connect with people on an emotional level. I thought I understood the power of narrative, the importance of authentic communication, but nothing prepared me for the story I would have to live through myself. Michael and I met 3 years ago at a hiking meetup group exploring the trails around Golden. He was the quiet software engineer who knew every wildflower name along the path, while I was the chatty marketing professional who forgot to bring enough water. By the end of that first hike up Lookout Mountain, he had shared his extra bottle with me, and I had shared my terrible jokes with him. It was the beginning of something beautiful. Our relationship developed with the steady, reliable rhythm of Colorado seasons. We spent that first summer exploring every trail within a 2-hour drive of Denver, from the easy walks around Boulder's Chautauqua Park to the challenging climbs up Mount Elbert. Fall brought cozy evenings in his Capitol Hill apartment, watching the aspens turn gold through his windows while planning our next adventure. Winter meant skiing at Loveland and Arapahoe Basin, teaching each other our respective strengths. He was fearless on black diamonds. I had perfected the art of hot chocolate timing. By spring, we both knew this was permanent. Michael proposed on a warm May evening at Sloan Lake, the downtown skyline reflecting in the water as runners and cyclists created a cheerful backdrop of normal Denver life. Nothing elaborate or dramatic, just the two of us on a park bench with a ring he had designed himself, incorporating a tiny Colorado aquamarine that caught the light like mountain snow. We married the following September at Red Rocks Park, surrounded by 60 of our closest friends and family members. The ceremony was everything we had dreamed of, intimate, meaningful, with the stunning red rock formations providing a backdrop that no cathedral could match. My parents, Linda and Bob Peterson, had driven down from their home in Lakewood, beaming with pride as they watched their daughter marry a man they genuinely liked and respected. Linda, my mother, has always been what people call a force of nature. As an elementary school principal at Lakewood Elementary, she manages 200 children, 35 staff members, and countless parent concerns with the kind of organized efficiency that makes other administrators weep with envy. She can diffuse a playground conflict, comfort a first grader, and run a school board meeting all in the same afternoon. Her ability to juggle multiple priorities and remain calm under pressure has always been one of her defining characteristics. Dad, Bob, works as a senior claims adjuster for a regional insurance company, a job that requires him to investigate accidents, assess damage, and deliver news that people often don't want to hear. He has developed a gentle but thorough approach to difficult conversations, a skill that has served him well both professionally and personally. At home, he's the steady presence who fixes leaky faucets, researches vacation destinations, and remembers every family birthday without being reminded. Growing up, I always felt secure in their love and support. They attended every school play, cheered at every soccer game, and celebrated every academic achievement with genuine enthusiasm. When I graduated from the University of Colorado with my marketing degree, they threw a backyard barbecue that lasted until midnight. When I got my first promotion at Mountain View Marketing Agency, Mom called everyone she knew to share the news. My younger brother Kevin, now 25, has always marched to his own drummer. Where I was studious and goal-oriented, Kevin was athletic and social. He played baseball through high school and still participates in several adult leagues around the Denver metro area. His easygoing personality and natural charm have always made him the family favorite for lighthearted gatherings, the one who can make everyone laugh and forget their troubles. The dynamics between us have always been comfortable and supportive. Kevin teases me about being too serious, I tease him about being too carefree, but there's genuine affection underneath. Our parents have never played favorites in any obvious way, treating our different personalities and interests with equal respect and encouragement. After our Red Rocks wedding, Michael and I honeymooned in Cabo San Lucas, spending a week swimming in impossibly blue water and eating fresh seafood while planning our future. We talked about buying a house in the next year or two, maybe something in the Highlands neighborhood with a view of the mountains. We discussed careers, travel dreams, and eventually, tentatively, children. Neither of us was in a rush to start a family, but we both knew we wanted kids eventually. We figured we'd give ourselves a year or two to enjoy married life, build up our savings, maybe take a few more big trips before settling into the responsibilities of parenthood.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
We had time, or so we thought. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm through that first winter of marriage. Michael's software development job at a downtown tech company provided stability and good benefits, while my marketing role offered creativity and growth opportunities. We found a routine that worked. Morning coffee together before work, evening walks around the neighborhood, weekend adventures in the mountains when weather permitted. Our families remained close and involved in our lives, but not intrusively so. Sunday dinners at my parents' house in Lakewood became a pleasant tradition, with Kevin often joining us when his softball schedule allowed. Michael's parents, Bill and Dorothy Thompson, lived in the same Capitol Hill neighborhood where we had settled, making spontaneous visits and shared meals a natural part of our week. By the following spring, we felt ready to start trying for a baby. It wasn't a dramatic decision or a heavily planned campaign, more like a gentle shift in perspective, a mutual agreement that we were prepared for the next chapter. We stopped preventing pregnancy and began the hopeful waiting that millions of couples experience. When I missed my period that July, we were cautiously excited. A home pregnancy test confirmed what we suspected, and after the initial shock and joy wore off, we began making plans. We scheduled an appointment with Dr. Patricia Williams, an obstetrician recommended by several friends. We started researching cribs and car seats with the same thoroughness we had once applied to hiking gear. The first trimester progressed normally, with all the expected symptoms and discomforts that pregnancy books prepare you for. Morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, fatigue that made evening social plans impossible, and a heightened sense of smell that turned our favorite Indian restaurant into a no-go zone. We shared the news with our immediate families after the first doctor's appointment confirmed everything was progressing well. Both sets of parents were thrilled. Mom immediately began researching grandparent classes and planning how she could adjust her work schedule to help with childcare. Dad started talking about building a playground set in their backyard for future visits. Michael's parents, Bill and Dorothy Thompson, began debating which bedroom in their house would make the best nursery for overnight stays. The excitement was infectious and overwhelming in the best possible way. We felt surrounded by love and support, confident that we had the foundation necessary to raise a child successfully. Our family's enthusiasm matched our own, creating a sense of shared anticipation that made the pregnancy feel like a community celebration rather than just a personal journey. I continued working through the first trimester, though I had to make some adjustments to my schedule to accommodate doctor's appointments and the unpredictable nature of pregnancy symptoms. My colleagues at Mountain View Marketing were supportive and understanding, with several offering advice and encouragement based on their own parenting experiences. Michael threw himself into preparation mode with characteristic thoroughness. He researched everything from the safest car seat installation techniques to the most effective sleep training methods. Our apartment began accumulating pregnancy and parenting books, downloaded apps for tracking fetal development, and screenshots of baby gear recommendations from trusted sources.
The examination room was familiar by now, with its standard medical equipment and cheerful decorations clearly chosen to make nervous parents feel more comfortable. Dr. Williams greeted us with her usual warm professionalism, asking about symptoms and concerns while reviewing my chart for any updates since the last visit. The ultrasound began routinely. Michael held my hand as we watched the technician prepare the equipment and apply the cold gel that every pregnant woman learns to expect. The monitor flickered to life, and we prepared to see our baby's continued development, perhaps catch a glimpse of tiny fingers or toes, maybe even get a hint about whether we were having a son or daughter. But the image on the screen wasn't what we expected. Instead of the movement and activity that had characterized previous ultrasounds, there was stillness. The technician's expression shifted from routine professionalism to concerned concentration as she moved the wand across my abdomen, searching for what should have been there but wasn't. Dr. Williams entered the room, took one look at the monitor, and gently asked the technician to step outside. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Michael's hand tightened around mine as we both realized that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Williams said softly, her voice carrying the weight of delivering news that would change everything. "There's no heartbeat. The baby stopped developing sometime in the past week or two." The words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making the room spin around the edges. Michael made a sound I had never heard before, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My first coherent thought was that there must be some mistake, that the equipment was malfunctioning or the technician had made an error. But Dr. Williams's gentle, experienced manner made it clear that there was no mistake. Our baby, the child we had been planning for and dreaming about, was gone. The pregnancy that had felt so secure and promising had ended without warning, without symptoms, without any preparation for the devastating reality we now faced. The medical term, she explained, was a missed miscarriage, a situation where the baby stops developing, but the body doesn't immediately recognize the loss. It can happen for various reasons, most commonly chromosomal abnormalities that are completely random and beyond anyone's control. Nothing we had done or failed to do had caused this outcome. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical decisions and emotional shock. We had to discuss options for managing the miscarriage, schedule follow-up appointments, and begin processing the reality that our plans for the future had suddenly and dramatically changed. Dr. Williams was compassionate and thorough, but even her expertise couldn't soften the brutal facts of what we were facing. Driving home from the hospital, Michael and I sat in stunned silence, neither of us sure what to say or how to begin processing what had just happened. The cheerful autumn afternoon that had seemed so hopeful a few hours earlier now felt cruel and mocking. Other cars passed us, filled with people continuing their normal days, unaware that our world had just collapsed. When we finally made it back to our apartment, I called my supervisor at Mountain View Marketing to explain that I wouldn't be returning to work that week. Michael contacted his manager with similar news. We turned off our phones and spent the rest of the day holding each other, crying, and trying to understand how something that had felt so certain could disappear so completely. That evening, we began the difficult process of calling our families to share the devastating news. Both sets of parents responded with immediate love and support, offering to come over, bring food, or help in any way they could think of. The outpouring of care was overwhelming and comforting, providing some assurance that we wouldn't have to navigate this loss entirely alone. But even surrounded by love and support, the fundamental reality remained unchanged. We had lost our baby, and nothing anyone could do would bring that child back or erase the pain we were experiencing. The foundation we thought we had built suddenly felt unstable, and we were forced to confront grief in a way neither of us had ever experienced before. The weeks following our loss became a crash course in grief that no amount of life experience had prepared me for. I discovered that losing a pregnancy isn't just about mourning the baby you've lost. It's about grieving the entire future you had imagined, the conversations you'll never have, the milestones you'll never celebrate, and the person you thought you were becoming, but now might never be. My body took time to recognize what my heart already knew.
The physical process of miscarriage stretched over several days, a cruel reminder that even when hope is gone, the body continues its biological processes with indifferent efficiency. Dr. Williams had warned us about this, but experiencing it felt like being forced to relive the loss repeatedly, each cramp and change a fresh reminder of what we had lost. Michael handled his grief differently than I did, which created its own challenges during those early weeks. Where I wanted to talk through every emotion and analyze every feeling, he preferred to process internally, working through his pain during long solitary runs through Washington Park or by losing himself in coding projects that demanded complete concentration. Neither approach was wrong, but the difference in our coping styles sometimes left us feeling disconnected when we most needed each other's support. Work became complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Mountain View Marketing had always prided itself on being family-friendly, and my colleagues genuinely cared about my well-being. But returning to an office environment after pregnancy loss felt like navigating a minefield of well-meaning but painful interactions. People didn't know whether to acknowledge what had happened or pretend everything was normal. Some coworkers avoided me entirely, clearly uncomfortable with the reality of loss, while others offered advice or platitudes that revealed their own discomfort more than any genuine understanding. The marketing campaigns I had been working on before the miscarriage suddenly seemed trivial and meaningless. How could I craft compelling messages about consumer products when I was struggling to find meaning in my own life? The creative energy that had always fueled my professional success felt depleted, replaced by a gray fog of exhaustion and disconnection that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. My supervisor, Janet Martinez, tried to be accommodating by offering reduced hours and flexible deadlines, but even her kindness felt heavy with the weight of others' expectations about how grief should look and how quickly I should recover. The corporate world has structures for dealing with death in the family, bereavement leave policies and protocols for coverage, but pregnancy loss occupies a strange middle ground where the loss is profound, but the support systems are unclear. During this period, I began to notice how differently people responded to our tragedy. Michael's parents, Bill and Dorothy, approached our loss with gentle consistency, checking in regularly without being intrusive, offering practical help without making assumptions about what we needed. Dorothy would text occasionally to ask if we wanted company for dinner or if she could bring groceries, while Bill found ways to include Michael in low-key activities like working on projects in his garage or attending Denver Nuggets games where conversation wasn't required. My best friend Jessica became an unexpected lifeline during those dark weeks. We had been close since college, but I discovered that true friendship reveals itself most clearly during crisis. While other friends seemed uncertain about how to interact with me after the miscarriage, Jessica simply showed up. She appeared at my apartment with Thai food from our favorite restaurant and sat with me while I cried. She sent funny memes when I needed distraction and gave me space when I needed solitude. Most importantly, she never tried to fix my grief or rush me through it. She simply witnessed it without judgment. But it was my parents' response that began to reveal the cracks in what I had always assumed was an unshakable foundation of support. Initially, Mom and Dad reacted exactly as I would have expected, with immediate concern, offers of help, and expressions of love and sympathy. Mom called every day during the first week, wanting updates on my physical recovery and emotional state. Dad sent thoughtful text messages and stopped by our apartment with flowers and homemade soup. However, as the immediate crisis passed and the reality of long-term grief set in, subtle changes began to emerge in their behavior. Mom's daily calls became every other day, then twice a week, then weekly check-ins that felt increasingly perfunctory. When I tried to talk about the depth of my sadness or the ongoing nature of my grief, she would redirect the conversation toward positive topics or suggest activities that might help me feel better. Dad maintained his gentle presence but seemed increasingly uncomfortable when conversations turned to the emotional aspects of our loss. He was excellent at practical support, fixing a squeaky door in our apartment, researching grief counseling options, helping Michael with car maintenance. But when I needed to process my feelings verbally, he would listen politely before changing the subject to safer ground. The shift was subtle enough that I might not have noticed it under normal circumstances, but grief has a way of heightening awareness and sensitivity to interpersonal dynamics. I began to feel like my parents were treating the miscarriage
as a discrete event that should be processed and moved past, rather than a fundamental loss that would require ongoing acknowledgement and support. 3 weeks after the miscarriage, Kevin returned from a work trip to California and came to visit us for the first time since receiving the news. His response was perhaps the most jarring of all. He hugged me with genuine sympathy and expressed appropriate condolences, but within 20 minutes of arriving, he was telling animated stories about his business trip and showing us photos from a weekend hiking excursion he had taken along the coast. It wasn't that Kevin was intentionally insensitive. He simply seemed to view the miscarriage as sad news that had been acknowledged and could now be filed away while life returned to previous topics and activities. When I tried to share some of what I was experiencing emotionally, he listened with evident discomfort before suggesting that Michael and I should plan a vacation or take up a new hobby to help us move forward. These responses from my family weren't cruel or deliberately hurtful, but they revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of grief and loss. They seemed to expect that after an appropriate period of sadness, life would return to its previous patterns and rhythms. The possibility that Michael and I might be permanently changed by this experience, that our future plans and perspectives might require ongoing adjustment, seemed beyond their comprehension. Meanwhile, Jessica had done research about pregnancy loss and had connected me with online communities where women shared their experiences with miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant loss. Reading their stories was both heartbreaking and healing. Heartbreaking because it revealed the enormous number of women who had walked this path, but healing because it normalized the intensity and duration of my grief. Through these online connections, I learned about local support groups for pregnancy and infant loss.
The idea of attending group therapy sessions initially felt overwhelming. Sharing intimate details of my experience with strangers seemed like it would compound rather than alleviate my pain. But as weeks passed and my family's discomfort with my ongoing grief became more apparent, the idea of connecting with people who truly understood began to feel necessary. Part 3. The therapeutic journey begins. Dr. Jennifer Martinez had been recommended by Dr. Williams as someone who specialized in reproductive health counseling and pregnancy loss. Her office was located in a converted Victorian house on South Broadway, painted a soothing sage green with mature trees providing privacy from the busy street. The waiting room felt more like someone's living room than a medical facility, with comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and artwork that suggested calm and healing rather than clinical efficiency. My first individual session with Dr. Martinez took place 6 weeks after the miscarriage, when it became clear that my grief wasn't following the trajectory my family seemed to expect. I had returned to work but was functioning at perhaps 60% of my normal capacity. Sleep remained elusive, interrupted by dreams about the baby we had lost or anxiety about future pregnancies. Simple decisions felt overwhelming, and activities that had previously brought joy now felt hollow and meaningless. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair and a presence that conveyed both professional competence and personal warmth. She had clearly worked with many women experiencing pregnancy loss because she understood immediately the specific nature of this type of grief, the way it combines the loss of a child with the loss of identity, the way it affects relationships with partners and families, and the way it complicates feelings about the future. During that first session, I found myself crying more freely than I had in weeks, finally in the presence of someone who didn't seem uncomfortable with the depth of my sadness or eager to redirect me toward more positive topics. Dr. Martinez asked thoughtful questions about my experience, validated the normalcy of my responses, and began helping me understand the psychological work that grief requires. She explained that pregnancy loss often involves what mental health professionals call disenfranchised grief, grief that isn't fully recognized or supported by society. Unlike other types of loss, where social rituals and extended support systems are expected, pregnancy loss often occurs in isolation, with limited acknowledgement from others and unclear expectations about appropriate mourning periods. This concept helped explain some of what I was experiencing with my family. It wasn't that they didn't care about my pain or want to support me. It was that they lacked frameworks for understanding the magnitude of what Michael and I were processing. Society doesn't provide clear guidance about how to support someone through pregnancy loss, so people often default to treating it like other temporary setbacks that time and positive thinking can overcome. After several individual sessions, Dr. Martinez suggested that I might benefit from group therapy specifically designed for women who had experienced pregnancy or infant loss. The group met every Tuesday evening in a conference room at the Wellness Center, facilitated by both Dr. Martinez and a social worker named Patricia Williams, who had personal experience with pregnancy loss. The idea of group therapy initially felt daunting. I worried about hearing other women's stories that might be more traumatic than my own, concerned that I might not be qualified for such intense support, and anxious about sharing intimate details of my experience with strangers. But Dr. Martinez assured me that the group was carefully structured to provide support rather than additional trauma, and that many women found it helpful to connect with others who truly understood their experience. My first group session took place on a cold Tuesday evening in November, about 2 months after the miscarriage. The conference room was arranged with 8 comfortable chairs in a circle, with soft lighting and a box of tissues strategically placed within reach of every seat. 5 other women were already present when I arrived, ranging in age from mid-20s to early 40s, each carrying the particular kind of exhaustion that comes with profound grief. Patricia Williams opened the session by welcoming me and briefly explaining the group's structure and ground rules. Everything shared in the room would remain confidential. Everyone would have opportunities to speak, but no one would be pressured to share before they felt ready. And the focus would be on support and healing rather than advice giving or problem solving. As each woman briefly shared her story during that first session, I was struck by both the diversity of their experiences and the common threads that connected us. Maria Santos had lost twins at 22 weeks due to a rare genetic condition. Ashley Chen had experienced 3 consecutive miscarriages and was struggling with decisions about future pregnancy attempts. Rebecca Johnson had delivered a stillborn daughter at 36 weeks and was navigating the aftermath of a full-term loss. Despite the differences in our specific circumstances, we shared an understanding of the particular kind of devastation that comes with losing a pregnancy or infant. We all knew the experience of having your body betray your hopes, of facing an uncertain future where previous assumptions about motherhood and family building had been shattered, and of feeling isolated in a world that seemed uncomfortable acknowledging the reality of our losses. The group became a place where I could express the full range of my emotions without fear of making others uncomfortable or having my feelings minimized. I could talk about my anger at seeing pregnant women in grocery stores, my terror about the possibility of future pregnancies, and my frustration with well-meaning people who suggested that everything happened for a reason or that I could always try again. Most importantly, the group helped me understand that grief isn't a problem to be solved or an illness to be cured. It's a natural response to profound loss that requires ongoing acknowledgement and integration. The other women in the group were at various stages of their healing journeys, some years past their losses and others in the acute phases of fresh grief. And their diverse perspectives helped me envision a future where the pain might soften without the love and hopes that I had felt for my baby disappearing entirely.
After attending group sessions for several weeks, Dr. Martinez suggested that it might be helpful for Michael to join me for some couples counseling sessions. She explained that pregnancy loss affects partnerships in complex ways, and that having a safe space to process our different grief styles and communication needs might strengthen our relationship during this challenging period. Michael was initially hesitant about couples therapy, concerned that it implied our relationship was in trouble rather than simply being tested by extraordinary circumstances. But after some gentle conversation, he agreed to try a few sessions to see if they were helpful. His primary concern was that he might not be processing his grief in the right way, or that his more internal approach might be inadequate compared to my need for verbal processing. Our first couple session revealed that both of our grief responses were completely normal, and that our different styles could actually complement each other if we developed better communication strategies. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that Michael's need for solitary processing didn't mean he cared less about our loss, just as my need for conversation didn't mean I was dwelling unhealthily on our pain. During these sessions, we also began discussing the impact our families were having on our healing process. Michael shared that his parents' gentle consistency had been helpful, while acknowledging that my parents' apparent discomfort with ongoing grief was creating additional stress for both of us. Dr. Martinez validated our observation that grief requires long-term support and suggested that family education might be beneficial. Part 4. Family Dynamics Under Pressure. As November transitioned into December, the approach of the holiday season intensified the emotional challenges we were already facing. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, filled with family traditions, elaborate decorations, and the kind of warm gatherings that create lasting memories. But facing the holidays while grieving felt overwhelming and complicated. Mom began her usual holiday planning early, sending group texts about dinner assignments for Christmas Eve, asking about gift preferences, and organizing the extended family gathering that had become a cherished tradition. Her messages were cheerful and detailed, filled with the kind of logistical coordination that she managed with characteristic efficiency. But reading them felt surreal. How could we discuss cranberry sauce recipes and gift exchanges when my world still felt fundamentally altered by loss? When I called Mom to discuss holiday plans, I tried to explain that Michael and I might need to modify our usual level of participation. I mentioned that being around pregnant relatives or small children might be emotionally difficult, and that we might need flexibility to leave early if the celebrations became overwhelming. Her response revealed the growing gap between her understanding of our situation and the reality of our ongoing grief. "Oh, honey," she said with well-meaning optimism, "Christmas will be just what you need to get your spirits up. Being around family and focusing on positive things will help you move past this difficult time. You can't let yourself stay sad forever." The phrase "move past this" hit me like a physical blow. It suggested that our loss was an obstacle to be overcome rather than a permanent part of our story, and that my continued grief was a choice I was making rather than a natural response to profound loss. I tried to explain that grief doesn't follow neat timelines and that healing doesn't mean forgetting. But Mom seemed to interpret my words as resistance to getting better rather than education about the nature of loss. Dad's approach was different but equally problematic. When I called him separately to discuss holiday concerns, he listened patiently to my worries before offering practical solutions that missed the emotional core of what I was trying to communicate. He suggested that we could leave the gathering early if needed, that he could speak to relatives about avoiding pregnancy-related conversations, and that we could create a quiet space for retreat if the celebration became overwhelming. His suggestions were thoughtful and well-intentioned, but they treated my grief as a logistical problem to be managed, rather than an emotional reality that required ongoing acknowledgement and support. The underlying assumption seemed to be that with proper planning and accommodation, we could participate in normal family activities without any significant disruption to the traditional holiday patterns. Kevin's response to holiday planning conversations was perhaps the most revealing of all. When I mentioned during a family phone call that Christmas might be emotionally challenging for Michael and me, he responded with visible frustration. "Come on, Sarah. It's been like 3 months. You can't let this ruin Christmas for everyone else. Mom's been planning these celebrations for weeks, and it's not fair to make everything about your situation." His words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about grief and loss that went beyond simple insensitivity. Kevin genuinely seemed to believe that 3 months was adequate time to process the loss of a pregnancy and return to normal emotional functioning. The idea that our loss might have permanent effects on how we experience family celebrations, or that our grief might require ongoing accommodation rather than temporary adjustment, appeared to be beyond his comprehension. More troubling was his suggestion that acknowledging our grief would somehow ruin the holidays for other family members. This implied that supporting us through our loss was a burden rather than a natural expression of family love, and that our emotional needs were in competition with everyone else's enjoyment rather than being part of the complex dynamics that healthy families navigate together. During individual therapy sessions, I shared these family interactions with Dr. Martinez, who helped me understand that my family's responses were unfortunately common but not inevitable.
She explained that many families struggle to provide adequate support for pregnancy loss because society lacks clear frameworks for understanding this type of grief, and because people often feel helpless in the face of pain they cannot fix. Dr. Martinez suggested that family education might be helpful, perhaps a session where she could explain the nature of pregnancy loss grief to my parents and brother, helping them understand what kind of support would actually be beneficial. The idea initially felt appealing, like it might bridge the gap between their good intentions and our actual needs. When I broached this possibility with my parents, their responses were revealing. Mom's immediate reaction was defensive, interpreting the suggestion as criticism of her support efforts rather than education about how to be more helpful. "I don't think we need a therapist to tell us how to love our daughter," she said with an edge to her voice that was unusual for our normally warm relationship. "We've been supporting you the best way we know how. If that's not good enough, then I don't know what else you expect from us." Dad was more open to the idea, but seemed to view it primarily as a way to fix our family communication problems, rather than as education about the ongoing nature of grief. He was willing to attend a session if it would help restore our previous family dynamics and eliminate the tension that had been building during holiday planning discussions. Kevin's response was the most dismissive of all. He couldn't understand why professional intervention was necessary for what seemed to him like a temporary family adjustment period. In his view, Michael and I needed to process our loss and then return to normal participation in family activities. The idea that our grief might require permanent changes in how our family operated together seemed both unnecessary and unreasonable to him. These conversations revealed a pattern that was becoming increasingly clear. My family loved me and wanted to support me, but they were interpreting support as helping me return to my previous self, rather than accepting that loss had fundamentally changed who I was and what I needed from relationships. They wanted to heal my grief rather than learn to accommodate it, to solve my sadness rather than develop comfort with its ongoing presence in my life. Meanwhile, the group therapy sessions continued to provide a stark contrast to my family's approach. The other women in the group understood that grief is not a temporary state to be overcome, but a permanent part of integrating loss into one's life story. They could sit with my sadness without trying to fix it, celebrate small signs of healing without rushing the process, and acknowledge the ways that loss changes priorities and perspectives without treating those changes as problems to be solved. Maria Santos, who had lost twins 2 years earlier, often shared insights about how grief evolves over time. She explained that the intensity of pain eventually softens, but that the love for her lost babies and the significance of their brief existence remained constant parts of her identity. Ashley Chen talked about how her multiple losses had changed her relationship with hope and uncertainty, making her both more cautious and more appreciative of the present moment. Rebecca Johnson, whose full-term loss was the most recent, often expressed the isolation she felt when friends and family seemed eager for her to get back to normal, rather than accepting that normal would now look different than it had before. Her experience resonated deeply with my own growing awareness that my family's support was conditional on my grief conforming to their expectations about appropriate timelines and expressions. As December progressed and Christmas approached, the tensions with my family continued to escalate. Holiday preparations became a series of negotiations about my capacity to participate in traditional activities, with each conversation revealing deeper misunderstandings about the nature of what Michael and I were experiencing. The breaking point came during a family dinner at my parents' house 2 weeks before Christmas. Mom had prepared one of my favorite meals, roast prat with vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert, and had clearly intended the evening to be a return to normal family gathering patterns. The conversation was carefully steered toward neutral topics, like work updates and vacation planning, avoiding any mention of our loss or ongoing grief. But the very effort to maintain normalcy felt forced and artificial. Every cheerful anecdote and optimistic plan seemed to exist in a parallel universe where pregnancy loss was something that happened and was then filed away, rather than integrated into ongoing life experience. I found myself feeling increasingly isolated and misunderstood, surrounded by people who loved me but seemed unable to accept the reality of who I had become. When Kevin mentioned his upcoming softball season and began making plans for spring games that he assumed Michael and I would attend, I finally reached my breaking point. The assumption that we would simply resume all previous activities and interests without any acknowledgement of how our priorities might have shifted felt like yet another demand to pretend that our loss hadn't fundamentally changed us. I don't know if we'll be able to commit to regular games, I said carefully. We're still figuring out what our spring will look like, and we might need to keep our schedule more flexible. Kevin's response was immediate and frustrated. Come on, Sarah, you guys loved coming to games. You can't just stop living your life because of what happened. At some point, you have to move on and get back to normal activities. The phrase, move on, felt like a slap across the face. It suggested that loving and missing our lost baby was something to be abandoned rather than carried forward. That healing meant forgetting rather than integrating loss into a new version of normal. I'm not trying to stop living, I replied, my voice tight with controlled emotion. I'm trying to build a life that acknowledges what we've been through and what we might still be dealing with.
That's different from just returning to exactly how things were before. Mom immediately intervened, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension. Let's not get into this tonight, she said with forced cheerfulness. Christmas is coming and we should focus on positive things. This is supposed to be a happy time for families. But her intervention felt like another invalidation, another suggestion that my grief was inappropriate for family gatherings and that healing required suppressing difficult emotions rather than processing them in the context of loving relationships. That evening marked a turning point in my understanding of what I needed from my family and what they were capable of providing. It became clear that expecting them to accompany me through the long-term work of grief was creating frustration and disappointment for everyone involved. Part 5, the group becomes essential. After the difficult family dinner, I found myself looking forward to Tuesday group sessions with an intensity that surprised me. The conference room at the Wellness Center had become the one place where I could express the full range of my emotions without fear of judgment or pressure to conform to others' expectations about appropriate grief responses. The week following the family dinner, I shared the details of that conversation with the group, describing my family's apparent discomfort with my ongoing grief and their expectations that Christmas should mark a return to normal activities and emotional states. The other women listened with recognition and understanding, several nodding as I described interactions that clearly resonated with their own experiences. It's like they want you to be grateful for the grief counseling if it makes you normal again, said Ashley Chin, but they get uncomfortable when therapy actually helps you understand that normal is going to look different now. Maria Santos added her perspective as someone further along in her grief journey. It took my family almost 2 years to understand that I wasn't being stubborn or dramatic when I said that some things would always be hard for me. They kept expecting me to graduate from grief like it was a temporary condition rather than a permanent part of my story. Rebecca Johnson, whose loss was more recent, shared her own struggles with family expectations during the holidays. My in-laws keep suggesting activities that involve being around babies and pregnant women. Then they act hurt when I decline. They interpret my boundaries as rejection of their love rather than protection of my emotional well-being. Dr. Martinez and Patricia Williams helped the group process these family dynamics within the broader context of grief education and societal understanding of loss. They explain that families often struggle with pregnancy and infant loss because they lack frameworks for providing long-term support for this type of grief, and because the invisibility of pregnancy loss makes it harder for others to understand the magnitude of what has been lost. Your families aren't necessarily unwilling to support you, Dr. Martinez explained. They may genuinely not understand what kind of support would be helpful, or they may be operating from their own discomfort with loss and uncertainty. This perspective helped me begin to separate my family's limitations from their love for me. Their inability to provide the kind of support I needed didn't necessarily reflect a lack of caring, but it did mean that I would need to find that support elsewhere, while setting appropriate boundaries about what I could expect from family relationships. During this period, the group also became a place where I could explore my fears and hopes about the future without pressure to reach premature conclusions or artificial optimism.
The other women shared their experiences with decisions about future pregnancies, career changes that followed their losses, and the ongoing process of rebuilding identity after profound loss. Some women in the group had chosen to try again for biological children, others had pursued adoption, and still others had decided that their families were complete without additional children. What struck me was the diversity of paths and the respect each woman showed for others' choices, even when those choices differed dramatically from their own. There's no right answer, Patricia Williams often reminded us. There's only what feels right for each individual person and family, and those answers can change over time as healing progresses. This acceptance of uncertainty and individual choice stood in stark contrast to my family's apparent assumption that healing meant returning to previous plans and goals. In the group, I could express doubts about future pregnancies without being told that I would feel differently later, or discuss how my career priorities had shifted without being encouraged to maintain previous ambitions that no longer felt meaningful. The group also provided education about the practical aspects of grief that my family seemed unprepared to understand. Dr. Martinez explained that grief is not linear, that healing doesn't follow predictable timelines, and that anniversary dates, holidays, and unexpected triggers can temporarily intensify emotions even months or years after a loss. This information helped me understand that my difficult response to Christmas planning wasn't a sign of inadequate healing or stubborn resistance to moving forward. Anniversary reactions are normal and expected parts of the grief process, and accommodating them requires flexibility and understanding rather than pressure to maintain previous traditions and activities. The group members shared strategies for navigating difficult social situations, setting boundaries with well-meaning but insensitive comments, and finding ways to honor their losses while building meaningful futures. These practical conversations were invaluable because they came from women who had actually lived through similar experiences rather than people offering theoretical advice or platitudes. As December progressed and my individual therapy sessions continued, Dr. Martinez and I began to discuss the possibility of family therapy sessions that would include my parents and potentially Kevin. The goal wouldn't be to change their fundamental personalities or force them to become different people, but rather to create better communication and understanding about what I needed from family relationships moving forward. Family therapy can be helpful when everyone is willing to participate genuinely, Dr. Martinez explained.
Martinez explained, but it requires acknowledgement from all parties that current patterns aren't working and that changes need to be made. When I raised this possibility with my parents again, their responses revealed the depth of the communication problems we were facing. Mom remained defensive, interpreting the suggestion as criticism rather than as an opportunity for improvement. I don't understand why you think we need professional help to be a family, she said during a phone conversation that left me feeling exhausted and misunderstood. We love you, Sarah. We're doing our best to be supportive. If our best isn't good enough, then maybe the problem isn't with us. Her response revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about the purpose of therapy and education. She seemed to view the suggestion as an attack on her adequacy as a mother, rather than as an opportunity to learn more effective ways of providing support during an extraordinarily difficult time. Dad was more open to the idea, but seemed to view family therapy primarily as a way to reduce conflict and restore previous family harmony, rather than as an opportunity to develop new patterns of interaction that could accommodate the reality of my changed needs and perspectives. Kevin remained resistant to the idea, continuing to express frustration with what he perceived as my unwillingness to get over the miscarriage and return to normal family participation. His resistance wasn't necessarily malicious, but it reflected a genuine inability to understand that some losses require permanent adjustments rather than temporary accommodation. These conversations with my family, combined with the support and understanding I was receiving in group therapy, began to clarify what I needed moving forward. I needed people in my life who could sit with uncertainty and ongoing grief without trying to fix or rush my healing process. I needed relationships where my changed priorities and perspectives were accepted, rather than treated as problems to be solved. Most importantly, I needed to accept that my family might not be capable of providing this kind of support, and that protecting my emotional well-being might require setting boundaries that felt uncomfortable for everyone involved. The holiday season was approaching rapidly, and I realized that I would need to make decisions about Christmas participation based on what I could handle emotionally rather than what would maintain family harmony. This represented a significant shift in my priorities and approach to family relationships, choosing my own healing over others' comfort and expectations. Dr. Martinez helped me prepare for these conversations by practicing clear communication about my needs and boundaries. We discussed how to express love for my family while maintaining limits about what kinds of interactions were helpful versus harmful to my healing process. Boundaries aren't punishments, she reminded me during one session. They're information about what you need to take care of yourself. Healthy families learn to work within those boundaries rather than fighting against them. As Christmas approached, I prepared to test whether my family could learn to support my healing in new ways, or whether I would need to create distance in order to protect the progress I was making in therapy and group sessions. The answer would determine not just how we navigated the holidays, but how our relationships would evolve in the months and years ahead. The conversation with Dr. Martinez about setting Christmas boundaries felt both empowering and terrifying. On one hand, I was finally learning to prioritize my emotional well-being over maintaining family harmony. On the other hand, the prospect of disappointing my parents during their favorite holiday season filled me with guilt and anxiety that made my stomach churn. Michael and I spent several evenings in mid-December crafting what we came to call our Christmas survival plan. We identified specific situations that might be emotionally triggering, conversations about future pregnancy plans, interactions with pregnant relatives, discussions about baby names or nursery decorating, and developed strategies for gracefully removing ourselves from those situations without creating dramatic scenes. We also established signals between us so that either could indicate when they needed to leave without having to explain their emotional state to curious family members. A hand on the shoulder meant, I need a 5-minute break, while touching an earlobe meant, we need to leave within the next 10 minutes. These preparations felt both necessary and absurd, like we were planning military maneuvers rather than family celebrations. The first test of our new approach came during my company's holiday party at Mountain View Marketing. The event was held at a downtown Denver restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the 16th Street Mall, decorated with elegant silver and gold ornaments that caught the light from passing holiday trolleys. Under normal circumstances, I would have enjoyed the festive atmosphere and the opportunity to socialize with colleagues outside the office environment. But walking into that party as someone experiencing grief felt like entering a parallel universe where everyone else was operating according to rules I no longer understood. Conversations about holiday shopping, vacation plans, and New Year's resolutions seemed to exist in a realm where loss and uncertainty were temporary inconveniences rather than fundamental aspects of human experience. My colleague Jennifer approached me near the appetizer table with genuine warmth and concern. Sarah, you look wonderful tonight. How are you feeling? I've been thinking about you. Her kindness was real and appreciated, but when I tried to give an honest answer about the ongoing nature of grief and the challenges of navigating holidays after loss, I could see discomfort creeping into her expression. Well, I'm sure next Christmas will be much better, she said with forced optimism.
You'll have had more time to heal, and maybe you'll have some exciting news to share. The implication that future pregnancy would somehow replace or cancel out our current loss revealed how little most people understood about the nature of grief and the reality that some wounds change us permanently rather than simply healing and disappearing. Throughout the evening, similar interactions repeated themselves, with variations. Colleagues who cared about me genuinely struggled to respond to my honest answers about how I was really doing. Their discomfort with ongoing grief and their eagerness to redirect conversations toward more hopeful topics made it clear that even well-meaning people in my life had limited capacity for supporting long-term healing processes. Michael navigated the party more successfully than I did, partly because fewer people asked him direct questions about his emotional state, and partly because his more reserved communication style made it easier for him to deflect personal inquiries without seeming rude or ungrateful.
But even he felt the weight of maintaining social pleasantries while carrying private grief that others couldn't see or understand. Driving home from the party, we debriefed the experience and realized that family gatherings would likely present even more intense versions of the same challenges. If colleagues who saw me daily struggled to understand the ongoing nature of my grief, family members who had limited exposure to my healing process would likely have even more difficulty accepting that Christmas might need to look different than previous years. The conversation with my parents about Christmas Day logistics took place 3 days before the holiday, during what was supposed to be a brief coordination call about dinner timing and gift exchange schedules. I had prepared myself for resistance to our modified participation plans, but I hadn't anticipated the level of hurt and frustration that my boundaries would generate. "So, you're saying you might just leave in the middle of Christmas?" Mom asked, her voice tight with disappointment. "You're gonna walk out on family dinner because talking about the future makes you uncomfortable?" "Sarah, Christmas is about being together as a family, not about catering to everyone's individual moods and preferences." Her characterization of my grief as a mood and my need for emotional safety as selfish preferences revealed the fundamental gap between her understanding of loss and the reality of what Michael and I were experiencing. I tried to explain that grief isn't a choice or an attitude that can be adjusted through willpower, but rather a natural response to profound loss that requires ongoing accommodation and understanding. "I'm not trying to ruin Christmas," I said, working to keep my voice calm despite the frustration building in my chest. "I'm trying to participate in a way that's emotionally sustainable for me. If I push myself beyond what I can handle, I'll end up having a breakdown that will actually disrupt the celebration for everyone." Dad attempted to mediate by suggesting practical compromises. Perhaps we could establish certain conversation topics as off-limits, or create a quiet space where Michael and I could retreat if needed. His suggestions were well-intentioned, but they still operated from the assumption that my grief was a temporary condition that could be managed through careful planning rather than a permanent change that required ongoing family adjustment. Kevin's response to our Christmas boundaries was the most difficult to navigate. His frustration had been building throughout December as my participation in family activities became more limited and conditional. The holiday boundary conversation became an opportunity for him to express months of accumulated resentment about what he perceived as my selfishness and dramatic attention-seeking. "This is ridiculous, Sarah," he said during a three-way call that quickly became heated. "You lost a pregnancy. That's sad, and we all understand that. But it's been 4 months, and you're still acting like the world revolves around your tragedy. Some of us have moved on and would like to enjoy Christmas without walking on eggshells around your feelings." His words hit like physical blows, each phrase revealing how little he understood about the nature of pregnancy loss and the long-term work of grief. The suggestion that I was choosing to remain sad for attention, that 4 months was adequate time to move on from losing a child, and that my emotional needs were selfish impositions on family happiness showed a level of insensitivity that shocked me. Michael, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, finally spoke up in my defense. "Kevin, I don't think you understand what Sarah has been going through or what pregnancy loss actually involves. This isn't about wanting attention or trying to control family activities. It's about recognizing that some experiences change people permanently and that healing doesn't mean pretending those changes didn't happen." Kevin's response revealed even deeper misunderstandings about grief and loss. "Look, Michael, I get that it was disappointing, but people lose pregnancies all the time, and they don't all turn into emotional invalids who can't handle normal family conversations. At some point, you have to accept what happened and get back to living your life." The phrase emotional invalid felt like a slap across the face. It suggested that my grief was a form of weakness or dysfunction rather than a natural response to profound loss. The implication that I was choosing to remain sad rather than doing the hard work of healing revealed Kevin's complete ignorance about the therapeutic process I was engaged in and the progress I was actually making. That phone conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with my family. It became clear that their love for me was conditional on my grief conforming to their expectations about appropriate timelines and expressions. When my healing process didn't match their assumptions about how loss should be processed, their support transformed into pressure, criticism, and resentment.
Christmas Day itself unfolded exactly as I had feared it would. The carefully planned boundaries and escape strategies that Michael and I had developed proved necessary within the first hour of arriving at my parents' house in Lakewood. Uncle Tom's wife was visibly pregnant with their third child, and the conversation immediately turned to due dates, nursery preparations, and excited speculation about whether they were having a boy or girl. Mom made no effort to redirect these conversations, despite knowing how difficult pregnancy-related topics had become for me. Instead, she seemed to expect that I would simply endure the discomfort in silence, or that exposure to other people's pregnancy joy would somehow cure my grief through positive thinking and forced participation. When I excused myself to the bathroom after 20 minutes of detailed discussion about baby shower planning, Mom followed me and cornered me in the hallway. "Sarah, you're being rude," she hissed in a whisper that barely contained her frustration. "Tom and Linda are excited about their pregnancy, and your attitude is making everyone uncomfortable. You need to put aside your own feelings and be happy for family members who are celebrating good news." Her demand that I suppress my grief in order to maintain social comfort for others revealed the fundamental problem with her approach to supporting me. She wanted me to heal in ways that didn't inconvenience other people or require any adjustment to family dynamics. The idea that supporting my grief might require temporary modifications to how family gatherings operated seemed unacceptable to her. The breaking point came during gift exchange time, when Kevin presented me with a box containing baby clothes in newborn sizes. "I thought you might want to keep these for when you're ready to try again," he said with misguided thoughtfulness. "They're really cute, and it might help you think positively about the future." The gesture was presumably meant as encouragement, but receiving baby clothes while actively grieving a lost pregnancy felt cruel and insensitive. The implication that I should be planning for replacement pregnancies while still processing my current loss revealed Kevin's fundamental misunderstanding about grief and healing. Michael immediately recognized my emotional state and initiated our pre-planned exit strategy. "I think we need to head home," he said calmly, beginning to gather our coats and gifts. "Sarah isn't feeling well, and we don't want to risk getting anyone else sick." Mom's response was immediate and angry. "You're leaving? It's only 3 o'clock, and we haven't even had dessert yet. Sarah, you're letting your grief ruin Christmas for everyone else. This is exactly what I was worried about." Her accusation that my grief was ruining Christmas for others felt like the final confirmation that my family was incapable of providing the kind of support I needed for long-term healing. They loved me, but their love was contingent on my grief being convenient and time-limited, rather than ongoing and sometimes disruptive. The car ride home was quiet and emotionally charged. Michael drove while I stared out the window at Christmas lights decorating houses throughout Denver, wondering how many of those homes contained families navigating their own hidden struggles and losses. The contrast between the external celebration and our internal grief felt like a metaphor for the isolation that comes with experiences others can't see or understand. That evening, while other families were presumably enjoying post-dinner games and dessert, Michael and I sat on our couch processing the day's events and beginning to understand that our relationship with my family would need to change fundamentally if we were going to protect our healing process and emotional well-being. Part 7. New Year Revelations and Growing Distance. The period between Christmas and New Year's Day felt like existing in emotional purgatory. The immediate crisis of holiday navigation was over, but the aftermath of damaged family relationships and unresolved conflicts created a heavy atmosphere that made it difficult to enjoy the time off work or appreciate the natural pause that comes with the end of one year and the beginning of another. Michael and I spent those in-between days taking long walks through Washington Park, visiting museums that were blissfully quiet during the holiday week, and having honest conversations about what we had learned from the Christmas experience. The clarity that emerged from those discussions was both liberating and heartbreaking. We realized that my family's response to our grief had revealed fundamental differences in values and approaches to emotional support that predated the miscarriage, but had been masked by the relatively smooth sailing of our previous family relationships. When everything was going well, these differences didn't matter much.
but crisis had exposed incompatibilities that couldn't be ignored or overcome through goodwill alone. "Your family loves you," Michael observed during one of our park walks, "but they love the version of you that doesn't require them to change or grow or become uncomfortable. They're not equipped to love you through transformation." His insight was painful, but accurate. My parents and Kevin genuinely cared about my well-being, but their caring was premised on my returning to my previous self rather than accepting and supporting the person I was becoming through the process of grief and healing. They wanted to rescue me from sadness rather than accompany me through it. The silence from my family during that week was telling. No one called to check in on how we were doing after leaving Christmas dinner early. No one reached out to apologize for insensitive comments or to ask how they might better support us moving forward.
The absence of follow-up communication suggested that they viewed the Christmas conflict as something I had caused through my unreasonable expectations, rather than as an opportunity to learn and improve our family dynamics. New Year's Eve arrived with none of the hopeful anticipation that typically accompanies the transition between years. Instead of feeling excited about new beginnings and fresh starts, I felt exhausted by the emotional labor of the previous weeks and uncertain about what the coming year would bring. The traditional ritual of making resolutions seemed premature when I was still figuring out how to navigate basic family relationships in the aftermath of loss. Jessica invited us to a small gathering at her apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, promising a low-key evening with close friends who understood our situation and wouldn't pressure us to participate in forced celebration or artificial optimism. The guest list included people who had supported us consistently through the months since the miscarriage, creating a safe space where we could acknowledge the passage of time without pretending that everything was fine. At midnight, instead of making resolutions about what we wanted to achieve in the coming year, Michael and I found ourselves reflecting on what we had learned about ourselves, our relationship, and our support systems during the most difficult period of our lives so far. The insights were valuable, but hard-won, paid for with the kind of emotional pain that leaves permanent marks on your understanding of how the world works. The return to work in early January provided welcome structure and distraction from family conflicts, but it also highlighted how much my priorities and perspectives had shifted during the months of grief and therapy. Projects that had once felt meaningful now seemed trivial, and professional goals that previously motivated me felt less urgent compared to the deeper work of healing and rebuilding my sense of purpose. Janet Martinez, my supervisor, noticed the change during our first weekly check-in of the new year. "You seem different," she observed with the kind of perceptive directness that made her an effective manager. Not worse, just different. More thoughtful maybe, or more selective about where you invest your energy. Her observation was accurate. Grief had taught me to distinguish between what truly mattered and what just seemed important because of social expectations or professional momentum. The marketing campaigns I developed now felt more authentic and emotionally resonant, but I also found myself less willing to work overtime on projects that didn't align with my values or contribute meaningfully to the world. This shift in professional perspective created its own challenges. The ambitious, achievement-oriented person I had been before the miscarriage had been well-suited to the competitive environment of advertising and marketing. The more reflective, boundary-conscious person I was becoming sometimes struggled to maintain the same level of engagement with corporate priorities and client demands. During individual therapy sessions in January, Dr. Martinez helped me process these professional changes within the broader context of grief-related growth and transformation. She explained that major losses often trigger reassessments of priorities and values, leading people to make significant life changes that better align with their evolved understanding of what matters most. "It's common for people to experience career shifts after pregnancy loss," she said during one session, "not because they're avoiding responsibility or becoming less capable, but because loss often clarifies what feels meaningful and what doesn't. You're not the same person you were before the miscarriage, so it makes sense that your professional life might need to evolve as well." The group therapy sessions continued to provide essential support and perspective during this period of transition and growth.
The other women shared their own experiences with post-loss life changes, describing career shifts, relationship modifications, and priority realignments that had emerged from their grief processes. Ashley Chen had left her high-stress job in financial planning to become a yoga instructor, finding that her multiple pregnancy losses had given her a deeper understanding of mind-body connection and the importance of stress management. Maria Santos had decided to pursue a master's degree in social work, motivated by her own experience with pregnancy loss to help other families navigate similar challenges. Rebecca Johnson was still in the early stages of her grief journey, but she was already questioning whether her demanding travel schedule as a sales representative was compatible with her evolving needs for stability and emotional support. The group provided a safe space for her to explore these questions without pressure to make immediate decisions or justify her changing priorities. These stories of transformation and growth helped me understand that my own career reassessment was a normal part of the grief process, rather than a sign of decreased ambition or professional commitment. However, the ongoing silence from my family created a persistent undercurrent of sadness and unresolved conflict that affected every other area of my life. By mid-January, nearly 3 weeks had passed since the Christmas disaster without any meaningful communication from my parents or Kevin. The absence of contact felt like a statement about their expectations and priorities. Michael encouraged me to reach out first, suggesting that maybe my family was waiting for me to initiate repair conversations rather than interpreting their silence as rejection or punishment. But I was exhausted by the pattern of being responsible for managing family emotional dynamics, especially when previous attempts at communication had been met with defensiveness and minimization of my needs. Dr. Martinez helped me analyze the family communication patterns that had developed over the years, pointing out that I had historically taken responsibility for maintaining family harmony, even when conflicts weren't primarily my fault. This pattern had worked reasonably well when family disputes were minor, but it was proving inadequate for navigating the deeper issues raised by my grief and their response to it. "What would happen if you stopped being the family peacemaker?" she asked during one session. "What if you waited for them to recognize that their approach isn't working and take initiative to repair the relationship themselves?" The question felt both terrifying and liberating.
On one hand, stepping back from my usual role as family mediator might result in permanent distance or estrangement. On the other hand, continuing to take responsibility for fixing relationships that others had damaged was enabling unhealthy dynamics and preventing authentic communication about real problems. As January progressed without contact from my family, I began to understand that their silence was probably more about their own discomfort with conflict and change than about anger toward me specifically. They had likely expected that time would resolve our Christmas tensions without requiring any adjustment to their perspectives or behaviors. This pattern of avoidance, rather than direct communication, revealed another aspect of my family's emotional limitations. They were comfortable providing support when it didn't require them to examine their own assumptions or modify their approaches. But they struggled with the kind of honest conversation and relationship evolution that crisis often demands. The realization was painful but clarifying. If my family was incapable of engaging in the deeper work that supporting my grief required, then I would need to find that support elsewhere while adjusting my expectations about what family relationships could provide moving forward. Part 8. The Support Group Invitation. By early February, the group therapy sessions had become the most valuable part of my week. The relationships I had developed with the other women felt more genuine and supportive than many friendships I had maintained for years. We had shared our most vulnerable experiences and witnessed each other's worst moments without judgment or pressure to perform emotional healing faster than was natural. Dr. Martinez often talked about the power of community in healing from pregnancy and infant loss, explaining that isolation tends to complicate grief while connection facilitates integration and growth. The group provided living proof of this principle, demonstrating how shared experience could normalize difficult emotions and provide hope for the future without rushing the natural pace of healing.
During a particularly meaningful session in mid-February, Patricia Williams introduced a concept that would ultimately change the trajectory of my family relationships. She mentioned that many support groups offered family education sessions designed to help partners, parents, and siblings understand pregnancy loss grief and learn more effective ways of providing support. Sometimes the people who love us most want to help but genuinely don't know how, Patricia explained. They may have good intentions but lack education about what pregnancy loss actually involves and what kind of support is most beneficial during the healing process. The idea immediately appealed to me because it offered a potential solution to the ongoing conflict with my family. Instead of expecting them to intuitively understand my needs or continuing to feel frustrated by their inadequate support, family education might provide them with concrete information about grief and practical strategies for being helpful rather than harmful. Maria Santos shared her experience with family education sessions following her twin loss 2 years earlier. "My parents were completely clueless about how to support me," she said. "They meant well, but they kept saying things that made everything worse. After they attended a few education sessions, they completely changed their approach. They learned to listen without trying to fix, to acknowledge my loss without minimizing it, and to support my healing process instead of rushing it." Ashley Chen had a different experience, describing family members who had attended education sessions but remained resistant to changing their established patterns of interaction. "Some people use the sessions as an opportunity to learn and grow," she said. "Others attend reluctantly and leave convinced that their original approach was fine and that everyone else is being overly sensitive." Rebecca Johnson expressed curiosity about family education for her own situation, where in-laws continued to make insensitive comments and suggestions despite witnessing her obvious pain. "I keep hoping they'll figure it out on their own," she said. "But it's been 4 months, and they're still acting like my daughter's death was a minor setback that positive thinking should have solved by now." Dr. Martinez explained that family education sessions work best when everyone participates willingly and with genuine openness to learning and change. The sessions provide information about grief, communication strategies, and support techniques, but they can't force people to care more deeply or to prioritize someone else's healing over their own comfort. "The goal isn't to change people's personalities," she said, "but to give them tools and understanding that can help them be more effective support people if they choose to use what they learn." After discussing the possibility with Michael that evening, we decided that family education might be worth trying with my parents and Kevin. The worst-case scenario was that they would refuse to participate or attend without genuine engagement, which wouldn't make our current situation any worse. The best-case scenario was that education might bridge the gap between their good intentions and my actual needs. The conversation with my parents about family education took place during the first phone call we had shared since Christmas, a stilted and careful exchange that felt more like diplomatic negotiation than family communication. Mom answered the phone with forced cheerfulness, as if nothing had happened during the previous 6 weeks of silence. "Sarah, how wonderful to hear from you. We've been thinking about you and hoping you're doing well. How are you feeling? Are you getting back to your normal routine?" Her immediate focus on my return to normal routine revealed that she was still operating from the assumption that adequate time had passed for me to move beyond grief and resume previous patterns of functioning. The idea that my routine might be permanently different, or that normal might look different than it had before the miscarriage, seemed beyond her consideration.
I explained the concept of family education sessions carefully, emphasizing that they were designed to help family members provide better support rather than to criticize their previous efforts. I framed the sessions as an opportunity for all of us to learn together about grief and communication rather than as a response to their inadequate support. Mom's initial reaction was defensive and resistant. "I don't think we need a professional to tell us how to love our daughter," she said with an edge to her voice that was becoming familiar. "We've been supporting you the best way we know how. If our love isn't enough, then I don't know what else you expect from us." Dad's response was more measured, but still revealed underlying resistance to the idea that their approach might need modification. "We want to help, Sarah,"
he said carefully, but I'm not sure what a therapist can tell us that we don't already know about supporting family members through difficult times. The conversation with Kevin was even more challenging. His immediate reaction was to question why professional intervention was necessary for what seemed to him like normal family dynamics that should resolve themselves through time and patience. "This seems pretty dramatic," he said with barely concealed frustration. "People lose pregnancies all the time without requiring their entire families to attend therapy sessions. Maybe the problem isn't that we don't understand grief. Maybe the problem is that you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." His suggestion that I was overreacting to pregnancy loss and creating unnecessary drama revealed the depth of his misunderstanding about the nature of grief and the legitimate need for family support during healing processes. The idea that seeking education about effective support strategies was somehow excessive or attention-seeking showed how little he understood about the work that healthy relationships require during crisis periods. Despite their initial resistance, I managed to secure tentative agreements from all three family members to attend at least one family education session. Mom and Dad seemed motivated primarily by their desire to restore family harmony rather than by genuine interest in learning about grief, but their willingness to participate felt like progress compared to weeks of silence and avoidance. Kevin's agreement was the most reluctant of all, accompanied by complaints about the time commitment and skepticism about the value of what he called touchy-feely therapy sessions. But he ultimately committed to attending one session, perhaps motivated by guilt about the Christmas conflict or pressure from our parents to participate in family problem-solving efforts. Dr. Martinez scheduled the family education session for a Saturday morning in early March, allowing everyone to attend without conflicts with work schedules. She explained that the session would focus on information about pregnancy loss grief rather than processing individual family dynamics, though there would be opportunities for questions and discussion about specific support strategies. The weeks leading up to the scheduled session felt charged with anticipation and anxiety. On one hand, I was hopeful that education might help my family understand why their previous support efforts had felt inadequate and how they might be more helpful moving forward. On the other hand, I was terrified that the session might reveal fundamental incompatibilities in values and approaches that couldn't be bridged through education alone. Michael remained supportive but realistic about potential outcomes. "It's worth trying," he said during one of our evening walks through the neighborhood. "But remember that education only works if people are willing to change their behavior based on what they learn. Some people attend sessions like this but leave convinced that their original approach was correct and that everyone else is being overly sensitive." His caution was well-founded and helped me prepare emotionally for the possibility that family education might not resolve our communication problems or restore the close relationships I had always enjoyed with my parents and brother. But the potential for positive change felt worth the risk of disappointment, especially since our current dynamic was clearly unsustainable for everyone involved. As the date of the family session approached, I found myself both dreading and eagerly anticipating what might unfold when my family was finally presented with professional information about grief and support, rather than relying on their own assumptions and instincts about what constituted appropriate help during crisis periods. Part 9. The Day That Changed Everything. March arrived in Denver with the kind of unpredictable weather that defines Colorado's springs. Warm sunshine one day, followed by unexpected snowstorms the next, creating a sense of uncertainty that matched my emotional state as the family education session approached. The date we had scheduled was Saturday, March 15th, chosen specifically because it wouldn't conflict with anyone's work obligations and would allow adequate time for discussion without feeling rushed. Friday evening, I received confirmation calls from both parents and Kevin, each expressing varying degrees of enthusiasm about the upcoming session. Mom sounded resigned but cooperative, as if she were fulfilling an obligation rather than pursuing an opportunity for growth and understanding. Dad seemed genuinely curious about what the session would cover, though I could detect underlying anxiety about potential criticism of his support efforts.
Kevin's call was the most revealing of the three. His tone suggested that he viewed the session as a formality that would hopefully put an end to what he considered my excessive emotional needs and restore normal family functioning. "I'll be there," he said with barely concealed impatience, "but I really think this whole thing is unnecessary. We're all adults who know how to support each other without professional intervention." That Friday night, Michael and I prepared for the session by discussing our hopes and expectations, trying to maintain realistic optimism while protecting ourselves from potential disappointment. We agreed that the session would be successful if it simply provided my family with accurate information about grief, even if it didn't immediately transform their attitudes or behaviors. "Remember," Michael said as we settled into bed, "you can't control how they respond to the information, but you can control how much of your emotional energy you invest in their reactions. Dr. Martinez is going to provide them with everything they need to understand what you've been going through. What they do with that information is up to them."
Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with bright sunshine that made the remaining snow on the mountains visible from our Capitol Hill apartment. I dressed carefully for the session, choosing clothes that felt both professional and comfortable, wanting to project confidence while feeling emotionally prepared for whatever might unfold during the next few hours. The drive to Dr. Martinez's office took us through familiar Denver neighborhoods that looked different in the crisp morning light. Michael and I arrived 15 minutes early, as we always did for appointments, and spent those extra minutes sitting in the parking lot gathering our thoughts and mentally preparing for what promised to be an emotionally charged conversation. At exactly 10 o'clock, we walked into the waiting room to find it empty except for the receptionist, who greeted us warmly and confirmed that Dr. Martinez was ready to begin. The conference room had been arranged with 6 chairs in a circle, creating an intimate setting that would facilitate conversation while maintaining the professional boundaries appropriate for an educational session. Dr. Martinez welcomed us with her usual calm professionalism, explaining the structure of the session and emphasizing that the goal was education and understanding rather than therapy or conflict resolution. She had prepared informational handouts about pregnancy loss grief, communication strategies, and support techniques that families could take home for future reference. "We'll start with some basic information about pregnancy loss and its emotional impact," she explained, "and then we'll discuss specific ways that family members can provide effective support during the healing process. There will be plenty of time for questions and discussion throughout the session." By 10:15, my family still hadn't arrived. Dr. Martinez glanced at the clock and suggested that we give them a few more minutes, acknowledging that Saturday morning traffic could be unpredictable and that people sometimes had difficulty finding the office location. Michael and I exchanged glances, both trying to suppress growing anxiety about their absence. At 10:20, I called Mom's cell phone and got her voicemail. Dad's phone went straight to voicemail as well, suggesting that it might be turned off or out of battery. Kevin's phone rang several times before going to voicemail, creating a sinking feeling in my stomach as I began to suspect that their absence wasn't due to traffic or navigation problems. Dr. Martinez remained professionally calm, but I could see concern beginning to register in her expression as it became clear that my family's tardiness was becoming outright absence. "Would you like to call them again?" she asked gently, "or would you prefer to wait a few more minutes to see if they arrive?" At 10:30, exactly 30 minutes after the scheduled start time, my phone finally rang with a call from Mom. Her voice sounded rushed and slightly out of breath, as if she were calling during a brief break from some other activity. "Sarah, honey, I'm so sorry, but we're not going to be able to make it to the session today. Kevin's softball team made it to the championship game, and it started earlier than expected. We're at the fields in Lakewood, and the game is just getting started. We can't leave now. You know how important this is to Kevin." The words hit me like a physical blow, each phrase revealing the depth of their misunderstanding about priorities and commitments. They had chosen my brother's recreational softball game over a professional session designed to help them support me through the most difficult period of my life. The championship game that was so important to Kevin had somehow become more significant than learning how to help their daughter heal from pregnancy loss. "Mom," I said, my voice tight with controlled emotion, "we scheduled this session 6 weeks ago. You all confirmed yesterday that you would be here.
Dr. Martinez has prepared materials specifically for our family, and Michael and I have been looking forward to this opportunity for weeks. Her response revealed the fundamental problem with their approach to supporting my grief. Oh, sweetie, I know you're disappointed, but you understand how these tournament schedules work. Kevin's been working toward this championship all season, and we promised we'd be there to support him. Surely your therapist can reschedule the session for another day? The casual suggestion that professional appointments could be rescheduled at the last minute, combined with the implication that Kevin's sporting event was more important than my mental health support, showed how little respect they had for the therapeutic process and how thoroughly they misunderstood the significance of what we had planned. Mom, I said, my voice tight with controlled emotion, we scheduled this session 6 weeks ago. You all confirmed yesterday that you would be here. Dr. Martinez has prepared materials specifically for our family, and Michael and I have been looking forward to this opportunity for weeks. Dad's voice came through the phone in the background, and I could hear him telling Mom something about the game starting soon and needing to find good seats.
The casualness of their conversation, the complete absence of recognition that they were inflicting serious emotional damage, felt almost worse than the initial disappointment of their absence. "We'll reschedule for next weekend," Mom said with forced cheer, as if this solution resolved all problems and demonstrated their continued commitment to supporting me. "Kevin won't have any games next Saturday, so we'll be completely free to focus on your session." But their willingness to reschedule missed the point entirely. The damage wasn't just in their absence from this particular session, it was in their decision-making process that had prioritized Kevin's recreational activity over my mental health needs. Their casual assumption that professional commitments could be rescheduled without consequence, and their complete failure to recognize the significance of what they had just communicated about our relative importance in their lives. Michael, who had been listening to the conversation, reached over and gently took the phone from my hand. "Linda," he said with controlled firmness, "I don't think you understand what just happened here. Sarah has been looking forward to this session for weeks. She was hoping that today would help bridge the gap that's been growing between her and her family since Christmas. Your absence isn't just an inconvenience, it's a statement about your priorities." Mom's response to Michael was defensive and irritated. "Now, Michael, that's not fair. We're very supportive of Sarah, and missing one appointment doesn't mean we don't care about her healing. Kevin's championship game is a special occasion. That won't happen again, while therapy sessions can be scheduled anytime." Her characterization of the family education session as just one appointment, and her suggestion that therapy was infinitely flexible while sporting events were irreplaceable, revealed fundamental misunderstandings about both the nature of grief support and the significance of professional commitments. Dr. Martinez, who had been listening to the conversation with professional composure, gently indicated that she would like to speak with my parents directly. Michael handed her the phone, and I watched her face as she spoke with calm authority about the importance of family support during grief processes and the significance of keeping commitments related to mental health care. "Mrs. Peterson," she said with professional directness, "I understand that scheduling conflicts can arise unexpectedly, but I want to make sure you understand that today's session was specifically designed to help your family support Sarah more effectively. Her grief is ongoing, and the communication patterns that have developed since her loss are creating additional stress during an already difficult time." Dr. Martinez's conversation with my mother lasted exactly 12 minutes, and I could see her professional demeanor shifting from patient educator to concerned advocate as the call progressed. Her voice remained calm and measured, but there was an underlying firmness that suggested she was no longer simply providing information, but making important assessments about family dynamics and support systems. "Mrs. Peterson, I need you to understand that what happened today isn't just a scheduling conflict," she said, her words carrying the weight of professional expertise. "When family members commit to participating in grief education and then fail to follow through,
It sends a powerful message to the grieving person about their priorities and the value they place on the healing process. I could hear Mom's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out her exact words. Her tone sounded defensive and increasingly agitated as Dr. Martinez continued to explain the significance of their absence and its potential impact on my emotional well-being and recovery. I understand that you feel your reasons for missing today's session were valid, Dr. Martinez continued, but I want you to consider what this communicates to Sarah about where her mental health ranks among your family's priorities. She's been looking forward to this opportunity for weeks, hoping that education might help improve your family's ability to support her healing. The conversation revealed details about my family's decision-making process that made their absence even hurtful than I had initially realized. According to what Mom was telling Dr. Martinez, they had known about Kevin's championship game for over a week, but had chosen not to mention the potential conflict until the morning of our scheduled session. "So, you've known about the scheduling conflict for 7 days," Dr. Martinez said with professional directness, "but you waited until 30 minutes after our appointment time to contact Sarah? Can you help me understand why you didn't discuss this conflict earlier so we could have rescheduled in advance?" The answer, as it emerged through Mom's defensive explanations, was that they had hoped Kevin's team would lose in earlier rounds, eliminating the championship game conflict entirely. When that didn't happen, they had assumed that I would understand their need to prioritize his athletic achievement over my therapy needs. This revelation was devastating because it showed that their absence wasn't due to unexpected circumstances or unavoidable conflicts, but rather to deliberate choices about which family members' needs deserved priority and support. They had gambled that Kevin's team would lose, and when that didn't happen, they had chosen his celebration over my healing, without considering the impact of their decision. Dr. Martinez's voice became increasingly firm as she processed this information. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to be very direct with you about what I'm observing."
Sarah has been grieving the loss of a pregnancy for over 5 months. She's been working hard in therapy to process this loss and rebuild her emotional stability. Today's session was specifically designed to help her family provide more effective support during this ongoing healing process. She paused, and I could see her making notes on her pad, the kind of documentation that therapists create when they're observing concerning patterns in family dynamics or support systems. Your decision to prioritize a recreational sporting event over your daughter's mental health treatment represents a significant failure in family support, she continued. More concerning is your apparent inability to recognize the seriousness of this choice or its impact on Sarah's well-being. Mom's response, which I could hear more clearly now as her voice rose in frustration, revealed the depth of her defensiveness and resistance to professional feedback. She was arguing that they were supportive parents who had always been there for their children, and that missing one therapy session didn't negate years of love and care. "I'm not questioning your love for Sarah," Dr. Martinez replied with patience that was clearly being tested. "I'm questioning your understanding of what constitutes effective support for someone experiencing pregnancy loss grief. Love isn't enough if it's not expressed in ways that actually help the person who's struggling." The conversation concluded with Dr. Martinez explaining that she would be making a report about today's incident in my treatment file as an example of inadequate family support that was potentially impeding my healing progress. She also informed Mom that future family sessions would be contingent on demonstrated commitment to prioritizing my mental health needs over competing family activities. After ending the call, Dr. Martinez turned to Michael and me with an expression of professional concern mixed with personal frustration. It was clear that my family's behavior had crossed a line from mere insensitivity into territory that she found professionally alarming. "I want you both to know that what happened today is not normal or acceptable family behavior," she said with conviction. "Families sometimes struggle to understand grief, and they often need education about how to provide effective support, but choosing to miss a scheduled family therapy session in order to attend a recreational event represents a fundamental misunderstanding of priorities that goes beyond simple ignorance about grief."
She explained that in her 15 years of practice specializing in pregnancy and infant loss, she had rarely encountered family members who were so cavalier about missing scheduled sessions or so defensive when confronted with the impact of their choices. Most families, even those who initially struggled to understand grief, demonstrated respect for the therapeutic process and willingness to prioritize their loved one's healing needs. Your family's response today suggests patterns of emotional neglect and priority dysfunction that extend beyond their reaction to your pregnancy loss, she said carefully. While grief can reveal and exacerbate existing family problems, it doesn't usually create entirely new patterns of insensitivity and disregard. Dr. Martinez then explained something that would prove to be the turning point in my entire family situation. As a licensed mental health professional, she was required to document instances where family members were creating barriers to treatment or engaging in behaviors that could be considered emotionally harmful to clients in vulnerable states. "I'm going to be making a report about today's incident," she said, her voice taking on the formal tone that indicated she was speaking in her professional capacity rather than as a supportive counselor. "This isn't punitive, but it is necessary documentation of family dynamics that are actively interfering with your healing process." She explained that the report would be filed with the state licensing board as part of my treatment record, documenting the pattern of inadequate family support that was complicating my grief recovery. While this wouldn't result in legal consequences for my family, it would create an official record of their failure to provide appropriate support during a mental health crisis. "More importantly," she continued, "I'm going to be making a recommendation that you consider temporarily limiting contact with family members who are unable to respect your healing process or prioritize your mental health needs. Sometimes the most therapeutic intervention is creating distance from people who are actively harmful to recovery, even when those people are family members who claim to love you." The recommendation felt both validating and terrifying. On one hand, having a mental health professional confirm that my family's behavior was problematic and potentially harmful provided external validation of what I had been experiencing internally. On the other hand, the suggestion that I might need to limit contact with my parents and brother represented a fundamental change in my understanding of family relationships and obligations. Michael, who had been quietly supportive throughout the session, asked Dr. Martinez to explain more about what limiting contact might look like practically and how we could implement boundaries that protected my healing without creating unnecessary drama or conflict. "The goal isn't punishment," she explained. "It's protection. Sarah needs space to heal without constantly managing her family's emotional reactions or defending her need for support. Sometimes that requires reducing contact until family members demonstrate that they can respect boundaries and prioritize her well-being." She suggested that we consider a structured approach to family communication, perhaps brief, infrequent phone calls with predetermined topics, or written communication that allowed me to process and respond to family interactions without feeling pressured to maintain real-time emotional regulation during difficult conversations. The remainder of our session was spent processing the emotional impact of my family's absence and beginning to develop strategies for moving forward without their support.
Martinez emphasized that healing from pregnancy loss was absolutely possible, even without ideal family support, though it would require building stronger connections with chosen family members and therapeutic communities. "You have Michael, you have the support group, you have friends like Jessica," she reminded me. "Family of origin isn't the only source of love and support available to adults. Sometimes the family we choose is more capable of supporting our healing than the family we were born into." As we prepared to leave the session, Dr. Martinez handed me a copy of the incident report she would be filing, explaining that I had the right to review any documentation that was being created about my treatment and family dynamics. Reading through her professional assessment of my family's behavior was both validating and heartbreaking. The report documented not just today's absence, but the pattern of inadequate support that had been developing since my miscarriage. It described their minimization of my grief, their pressure for me to return to normal functioning, their resistance to learning about pregnancy loss, and their prioritization of social harmony over my emotional needs. "This creates an official record," she explained,
that your healing has been complicated by family factors beyond your control. If you ever need documentation of the challenges you faced during your grief process, this report provides professional verification of those circumstances. The drive home was quiet and emotionally charged. Michael held my hand as he navigated Denver traffic, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. My family's absence had been painful, but Dr. Martinez's response had transformed it into something much more significant, an official recognition that their behavior was professionally concerning and potentially harmful to my recovery. "How do you feel about the report?" Michael asked, as we stopped at a red light near our apartment. "Are you glad she's documenting what happened, or does it feel like escalating the conflict unnecessarily?" I considered his question carefully, trying to separate my emotional reactions from my rational assessment of the situation. "I think I'm relieved," I said finally. "For months, I've been wondering if I was being too sensitive or expecting too much from my family. Having a professional confirm that their behavior is actually problematic helps me trust my own perceptions." The validation was significant because it meant that my growing sense of isolation and frustration with my family wasn't due to unrealistic expectations or excessive emotional needs, but rather to genuine failures in their ability to provide appropriate support during a mental health crisis. That evening, we spent time discussing what our lives might look like with limited family contact. The prospect was both liberating and sad. Liberating because it would free us from constantly managing their emotional reactions and defending my healing process, but sad because it represented the loss of relationships that had been central to my identity and sense of belonging. "We can always reassess as time goes on," Michael reminded me. "Limiting contact doesn't have to be permanent. If they demonstrate genuine change and respect for your boundaries, we can gradually rebuild those relationships. But right now, protecting your healing has to be the priority." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.